Welcome to the Murder Media Podcast, where we analyse and overthink true crime content. I'm your host, Dr. Stella Marie Gaynor, and you can follow the Murder Media Project over on Instagram at murdermedia81. That's the numbers 81, and you can email the project direct at murdermedia81@gmail.com. It's been a while, and that's because I got to have a rest, an actual rest from work and from podcasting and from everything, which was really, really nice. And now the rest is over, and I start teaching again soon, so that's why I'm getting a quick podcast episode in before I have to quit it again for a while. I went on a little camping break. I went to the village of Eyam in Derbyshire, so that's the plague village that I was on about. Was it last time? Last time we were talking about the Ted Bundy ghost episode, I think. Anyway, I went there and saw the stuff and went wild in the museum gift shop. Well, not that wild. I bought 2 things, which I think was quite good for me, actually. I wanted to buy many more things, but it turns out I didn't need a coffee cup with the skull on it, so I put that back. But I did buy a book and I did buy a little notebook. Then we went to Solfest. We went as crew for the kids' field again, and this year, I shit you not, the weather was really hot. It was absolutely boiling. No hurricanes, no stages blowing down this year. I actually have a suntan, which if you know me, if you've met me in person, you'll realise just how odd that looks. My teenager got their GCSE results, which were really good, and they're going to the college of their choice, which is even better, so that's all good. The stress and the anxiety of that is now over. So this episode, weeks and weeks after it was promised, I know I'm a terrible podcaster, but it's not my full-time job. I have a full-time job. This episode is going to close the series, or the season 2, with 2 things. So the first thing is a book update, and the second is a analysis of a 2-parter that I watched about the Yorkshire Ripper, which I've left my notes actually for. I've left them downstairs. Hang on, please hold.
We're sorry. All of our representatives are still assisting other customers. Please remain on the line, as we value your call.
Okay, I'm back. So before I get to silly old Peter Sutcliffe, the book news, I signed a contract. I officially have a publisher. The Murder Media book will be published with the University of Texas Press, so that's who's had my proposal all this time, who I've been really cagey about in case they said no. But I'm going to submit my manuscript in July 2027, so that gives me just under 2 years to write a book. So between now and then, I need to write a whole book. I know I've got 2 chapters already done, but they will need rewriting when the rest of the book's done to kind of, to get it all to fit together. So I've got that to do around my full-time job and at some point to bring the podcast back. So the plan is to kind of kill several birds with one stone. One of the main comments from the reviewers of the book proposal was that I might be including too many cases, and they were worried that the book might be a little bit overstuffed. So the ones that I will end up having to remove, I think, because, yeah, they are right. I mean, obviously they're right, what they're on about, but I think I'm going to have to take some of the case studies out. But what I can do instead is do the analysis of those case studies here on the podcast, and then the analysis is still being done. I don't feel like I'm losing anything. And then it can dovetail nicely with the book and sort of the marketing of the book. And the 2 things can kind of point to each other, if that makes sense. And then the other thing is that as I write and research my book, my thinking and ideas will obviously develop. So revisiting media texts that we've already covered, that we've already looked at in the podcast, as I go through the process of writing the book, should also be quite interesting as I sort of reframe and rethink and sort of recalibrate as the research develops, because you always end up in a slightly different place to where you started. Like, your answers and your conclusions always, it's quite an organic process and they always change. So we'll revisit some of the things that I've done with the podcast over the last 2 years. And as for workload more generally and the podcast more generally, I think more episodes with guests would be a good thing, because it would help me to get more episodes done without having to write the scripts first, because it's the script writing that takes an awfully long time. The recording, as long as I get it recorded in one sitting, and I know sometimes it's taken me a few sittings because of sound issues, but the recording and the editing doesn't actually tend to take as long as the scripting. So if I can get more people in as guests, then that kind of saves me some work. So I'll try and do that a little bit more as we move into season 3, and as I move into writing podcast episodes, which are things that would have been in the book but will have been taken out in order to keep to book word count and to keep to what the reviewers said from my book proposal. Yeah, I did it. I took an idea from scratch and I did all the stuff and I got a publisher. So the reason why I'm quite very pleased about all that is because last time with my first book, with Rethinking Horror, I had the PhD behind me. I'm sure I've mentioned this on the podcast before, that maybe in the very first episode, that I had the PhD behind me to kind of prove that I could do it, as kind of backup or support, you know, proof that I could do this. So all of this murder media stuff is new. So, you know, thank fuck it works, and I've got a publisher and I've got a contract, but, you know, I've got to write the damn thing now. So wish me luck. Right, so let's get on to this episode's subject. I watched a new thing about Peter who wears a jumper upside down Sutcliffe. It's on Prime Video in 2 parts, so if you want to watch it, it won't take up too much of your time. I watched both episodes in one evening, so I think you can as well. And it's called Hunting the Yorkshire Ripper, and it's on Amazon Prime or Prime Video or whatever the hell it's called. The blurb on it, or the byline, is it a byline if it's not press? I think it's just blurb, isn't it? I don't know. Anyway, the blurb says, so this is quoted directly from the Prime website. In 1979, police receive a tape from a man claiming to be the Yorkshire Ripper. His chilling message reveals where he will strike next, leading to detectives diverting their manhunt in a bid to track him down. End quote. That's quite interesting, right? Oh, I thought so anyway. So it's called Hunting the Yorkshire Ripper, but it's not about Silly Sutcliffe. In fact, there's another one coined, isn't it? We've got Bullshit Bundy, so now we've got Silly Sutcliffe. It's more about the tapes from the hoaxer. So I think there's something interesting going on with the title there, Hunting the Yorkshire Ripper, in that they were actually hunting the Yorkshire Ripper, and then they were also hunting this guy who claimed to be the Yorkshire Ripper, but he wasn't. It was just this fucking idiot from Sunderland, which we'll get to him in a bit. We all know that Netflix is obsessed with its tapes. We've got the Bundy tapes, the Dharma tapes, the Gacy tapes, the Nielsen tapes, the Son of Sam tapes, which, by the way, I've started watching, but I've not finished yet because Berkowitz might be the most boring man to ever exist. I think he's even more boring than Ted Kaczynski, which is a bold claim, but oh god, what a whiner he is. Anyway, I think I've got like an episode and a bit left of the Son of Sam tapes to watch. It's another Berlinger thing, isn't it? And you all know how I feel about Joe Berlinger stuff. I do like Joe Berlinger's stuff, but it's just, I don't know. You know what? I've talked about it before. I don't need to dwell on it now. But Netflix loves tapes. Nielsen tapes, Dharma tapes, Son of Sam tapes, tapes everywhere. So Prime has pitched in with a Yorkshire Ripper text, and the fact that it focuses on the tapes from John Humble, so that prick who thought it would be a good idea to pretend to be the Ripper, comes as no surprise that they're also using this tapes motif. So it feels like we can only have a retrospective true crime show now if there's an analogue tape deck to tell us the story. If it happened in the 1970s or the 1980s, then quick, break out the dictaphone. Let's hear the trailer.
I'm Jack. I warned you in March that I'd stray again.
A man who's already killed 5 women remains a complete enigma.
I see you are still having no look catching me.
The police were just absolutely desperate for there to be a breakthrough.
Something monumental has happened.
We've got a tape of the killer.
I've come here tonight to play you a tape of the man who we believe to be the so-called Yorkshire Ripper.
If we identify the voice, we've got the killer.
You are no nearer catching me now than 4 years ago when I started. I think it's 11 now, isn't it?
We've got the chance of blowing this case wide open and finding out who's done this.
I can't see myself being nicked just yet.
As you can hear then in that trailer, very little is about Silly Sutcliffe himself. The words spoken are John Humble's and various contributors to the documentary who point out quite clearly that the police were desperate. The trailer features close-up shots of a tape deck, again what we've seen in the tape series over on Netflix, and it pans up, pans down and across tape decks, across the rolling tape itself, as if, again, the truth can be found in there if we only look hard enough. But the truth isn't in these tapes, is it? These tapes were a hoax. These tapes were made by an imbecile who fooled the desperate, arrogant police into chasing the wrong suspect. Honestly, the Sutcliffe case, the hoax tapes, it makes my blood boil. And I know we've talked about it in the past, but we'll get to that and to the depiction of that in this two-parter in a little bit. Hunting the Yorkshire Ripper then opens with the clicking and whirring of film stock as the frames and the sprocket holes of the sides are exposed. This pointing to the physicality of film comes back later on from the documentary contributors. For now, in this opening scene, this whirring, scratched, dark film stock shoots dark and moody suburban roads and lanes lined with bare trees and an encroaching twilight. A lady gets out of a car. She speaks, and if you've seen any Yorkshire Ripper murder media texts, you know her voice. It's Tracy Brown, who in 1975 was attacked by Silly Sutcliffe. The opening moments feature Tracy, who, by the way, should be noted here, is an absolute legend. She was so young. She was 14 and faced an appalling attack, and she survived. So Tracy, you are incredible. All the women were incredible and worthy of respect, of course, and I will speak to them when I write about the long shadow in the book. But here, this section focuses on a young Tracy Brown. So the opening moments of this documentary then, we've got Tracy Brown. She gets out of a car. She narrates what she was doing that evening in 1975, coming home from a mate's house. She walks down a gloomy lane, the lane where she was attacked. She recalls it was dark, but there was a full moon. She describes where she encounters, as she says, this chap. It's so northern, I love it. And she describes walking down this lane, falling into step with him as he was walking in the same direction. They chatted, she said. He kept stopping, she tells us, to tie his shoelaces. He stops to tie them a third time, says Tracy, and it's like, come on, Sutcliffe, a third tie of the shoes. How many feet have you got, you prick? The stopping and the starting and the following is very much like a slasher movie. The score on this opening section too, very horror movie. It's spooky, it's eerie, it's tense. Tracy's narration is intercut with tape scratches and distortion, flashes of screeching sounds, these pockets of screaming terror as Tracy walks up the very path she took with Sutcliffe that night. She describes how he hits her with his hammer several times, and she describes, and as we know, a car comes down the lane, disturbing the attack, and Sutcliffe chucks her over a wall. Tracy, covered in blood, runs for help, and thankfully she survives. Opening this documentary with such horror genre overtones might seem a little gratuitous, but as it continues, this gives way to a more rumbling horror, a horror that sits in the underbelly of 1970s and early 1980s Northern England. This horror undercut the investigation into the case, which I know I've ranted about before, but which this documentary, directed by Nick Mattingly, illustrates really succinctly. The horror of it all, the way that it all seemed so unreal and so distant while the victims were sex workers, was brought bursting into the real world, into the neighbourhoods and into the homes, as Silly Sutcliffe continued his nasty habit and started killing women who were not sex workers. Hunting the Yorkshire Ripper is told primarily from the perspective of Detective Chief Superintendent Chris Gregg. We follow Greg in the first episode as he recounts the deaths of Wilma McCann, Emily Jackson, Irene Huston and Patricia Atkinson. These first deaths are run through really fast in the pacing of this first episode, which I found interesting because as I watched it, at first, I was a little bit irritated. Now, I know I've said here before that I think we should really remember those who died, remember who the victims were. They were real people, real lives, they had hopes, dreams, families, and of course, so much murder media content is all about the bastards who take their lives rather than the lives that were taken. So when this documentary, this Hunting of the Yorkshire Ripper on Prime, when it jumped through the victim list so quickly, I did think, oh, here we go, just another list of names, are they? And I must say, I did jump to that conclusion, but I was wrong. This documentary is doing something else entirely. So, okay, look, it doesn't dwell on the women who died. It doesn't tell us anything about them. And yes, I find that to be a little bit insensitive sometimes. But this documentary runs through the deaths with a real urgency, much more urgency than, say, the Netflix Ripper documentary or, as mentioned, ITV's Long Shadow. What this does, as told by Chris Gregg, is really generate a feeling of scrambling that the West Yorkshire police had as the list of victims grew longer. Now, I would also say that Greg is very much positioned as the good guy, and they believe that he was, and he is honest about the mistakes that were made. In the production, though, there are decisions made that after the horror-like sequence of the attack of Tracy Brown at the start, now we have Greg wandering around in a long coat with the collar flicked up, looking out at the locations under the grey, gloomy sky of a grey, gloomy Yorkshire, all genre conventions of the classic UK cop drama. There's so much to unpack here with the intertextuality of documentary and drama and the borrowing that goes on between the two. Drama uses the shaky camera work to create the sense of immediacy that we see in documentary, and documentary reconstructs crimes via dramatised sequences or, as in this case, just using those stylistic markers of a gritty UK crime drama, the costumes, the colour palettes, having Greg sit in a car and talk about the horrors of the crime. But that kind of detailed analysis takes thousands of words, and honestly, that's for the book, not for here. Then, a young Jane MacDonald tragically loses her life at the hands of Shitbag Sutcliffe. We all know this, the fucking press, referred to her as the first innocent victim. Of course, implying that all the other victims, well, it was their fault. Chris Gregg reflects on this, and again I think with a solid honesty on the attitude of the 1970s. And a journalist contributor, Joan Smith, who was working on Manchester Piccadilly Radio at the time, she talks about being sent to press conferences where she was the only woman and how she felt a sense of how she didn't belong there. Joan Smith explains how the press treated the women who died as if they weren't real. She says it was sensationalised and, quote, it was almost like a film, end quote. If we think back to that opening sequence with Tracy Brown, which I read as being very much like Tracy narrating a slasher film sequence, along with Mattersley's construction of that sequence, what we have is a strong thread of the Ripper case being pulled at the time out of reality and manufactured by the media into a horror film-like occurrence. And I think I'm particularly interested in this because I've been, as mentioned, writing a new module for work which looks at the overlap between horror and true crime. And we can both look back at media text and see this in action with hindsight, but here, Joan Smith notes that it was happening right then and there, as it happened. Then Jean Jordan was killed, and she was found not far from where I live in Manchester. Then Yvonne Pearson, and again, the documentary doesn't linger on these women. Helen Ricker is killed. Throughout, we keep getting these intercutting flashes of tape distortion, tape ripping, echoing screams, framing the whole story with a ricochet of horror.
I'm Jack. I see you are still having no luck catching me. I have the greatest respect for you, George. But Lord, you are no nearer catching me now than 4 years ago when I started. I reckon your boys are letting you down, George. They can't be much good, can they? The only time they came near catching me was a few months back in Chapeltown, when I was disturbed. I warned you in March that I'd strike again. Sorry it wasn't Bradford. I'm not quite sure when I'll strike again. But it will be definitely sometime this year. I'm not sure where. Maybe Manchester. I like it there. There's plenty of them knocking about. They never learn, do they, George? I bet you've warned them, but they never listen. Well, it's been nice chatting to you, George. Yours, Jack the Ripper.
This documentary, Hunting the Yorkshire Ripper, is, for me anyway, actually about the tapes and the letters sent by the... I was going to say mysterious, but that gives him some actual fucking credence. So instead I'll say sent by the brainless, moronic, unbelievably reckless John Humble, who signed himself off as Jack the Ripper. Great. Original. Never heard that name before. You absolute bellend. Anyway, as I've talked about with this murder media project before, one of the key things, one of the most defining features of contemporary murder media is repetition. Either cases being repeated, or as we saw with the Netflix documentary on the Night Stalker and in the HBO drama about the staircase last episode, bits of evidence or photos being repeated again and again inside the same text. Each time a thing repeats, a photo for example, the reading of it shifts as the story unfolds. Sorry if you can hear a plane, I've got the window open because it's really hot. In this documentary, Hunting the Yorkshire Ripper, the tapes from Jack, with massive scare quotes around them, because it wasn't Jack, for fuck's sake, are repeated again and again. All the players, the contributors to this documentary, are each given a tape deck, and they're filmed, reconstructed, listening to the hoax tape again. Chris Gregg, Tracy Brown, Joan Smith, they all hear the tapes, so we hear those words again and again, and of course I've just played them to you again. The tapes featured a man, this cretin of a man, with a Geordie accent, specifically Sunderland. University professors at the time were able to narrow down where this particular accent is from, and then as we all know, the investigation veers off into looking only for men with Geordie accents. The fact that every victim who survived said, no, it was a Yorkshireman. No, that's not him. No, that's not his voice, was duly ignored. The frustration. The frustration. Then Vera Millwood is found in the grounds of Manchester Royal Infirmary. George Oldfield is still convinced the tapes are real, and Chris Greggs is really insightful here about this in the documentary. He says that Oldfield was kind of embroiled in a personal battle with this Jack person, that because this Jack was writing and recording to him personally, that's what kind of kept George Oldfield on this line of inquiry, that it sort of emboldened the arrogance of Oldfield, that he was in a one-to-one match with the Yorkshire Ripper. So there's loads to unpack here, and the documentary does it very well. So if you've got Prime, go and watch it. But the bit of the doc that I found most fascinating, and for me what was new that this documentary brought to the table, and why I was wrong to be my usual bristly self about not spending enough time on the women's lives, the second episode details the hunt for the writer of the letters, the recorder of those tapes. So Sutcliffe has been caught, tried, in prison, fuck off, let him rot, and Chris Greggs, rightly, is still furious about the tapes that so colossally messed up the investigation. I mean, it's not just the tapes, is it? It's the arrogance of Oldfield. But anyway, so we get the investigation, the hunt for who turns out to be John Humble. So they only found him, right? So as DNA science got better, they managed to get a sample from one of the letters, like I guess the envelope or the stamp that he'd licked. John Humble's DNA, by 2005 when he was arrested, was already in the system for a previous offence. I can't remember what it was. I should have written it down, but you're going to go and watch the doc anyway. So they find his house, and by they I mean the cops, Chris Greggs and his team. They find his gaff, and in they go. And my friends, it is rotten in his house. So on this documentary, they've got the footage of Humble's house, and I'm not sure if it's camera or body cam. I mean, I don't know, with it being 2005, probably wasn't body cam, maybe it had a little handheld, I don't know, but it's really grim. And John Humble himself is a complete fuck-up of a man. John Humble is arrested, and the documentary shows us the videotape of his interview with the police. He has a solicitor there and an appropriate adult. The police don't tell him they've got the DNA evidence that proves that it's him. So they're asking him questions, like that typical, like the CCTV camera up in the corner, interview footage that we see all the time. So we're looking at that. So they're asking him questions, and John Humble sat there with his solicitor, and John Humble, he won't speak. And he can't speak, can he? Because the second they hear his voice, they hear it's the same as the voice on the tape. So it's one of them where I'm watching it and I'm yelling at the telly like, they've got you, you bastard. Anyway, eventually, because he won't speak and he's just nodding and shaking his head, and they're having to say on the tape, Humble's shaking his head or whatever, for the purposes of the tape and all that. Then they tell him about the DNA, and he speaks because he knows it's all over. But then, in an absolutely brilliant murder media moment, they get John Humble to read a transcript of one of his tapes that he sent, and the documentary overlays that with the recording of one of those old tapes. It's so eerie, like proper hairs on the neck standing up stuff. Now, I've seen a lot of shitbag Silly Sutcliffe media, but I've never heard John Humble answer the question, why did you do it? He even said that he called the tip line and he told the cops that the tapes and letters were a fake, because even this fucking chump could see that what he had done had derailed the investigation and more girls were being killed. And then that call was ignored and lost in the sea of information that was coming in, and that was being ignored because George Oldfield wanted to capture Geordie. And when they asked why he did it, he just said he wanted to be famous. It was a bit of a laugh. He didn't realise what he was doing, but it's just like, what? The brain still scrambles when you think about it. You must watch this documentary. Like I said, it's in 2 parts. It's on Amazon Prime. You can watch it in one evening. And it's more about the hunt for John Humble and the tapes rather than Shitbag Sutcliffe himself. Like, Sutcliffe is really, really in the background of this documentary, much like he's in the background of The Long Shadow. One more quick thing to note. I also started watching the Red Riding trilogy, which is on Netflix in the UK now. Again, 10 out of 10 would recommend. I'm on the middle one at the moment, the 1980 one. And there's so much intertextuality going on in UK TV crime drama. It would honestly take another book to write about, but it reminds me of how in American Horror Story the same cast reappear. In UK crime drama, the same thing is happening. So in Red Riding, which was made in the early 2000s, we've got David Morrissey. He plays Maurice Dobson in Red Riding, but he also plays George Oldfield in The Long Shadow. Maxine Peake, we love her. She plays Helen Marshall in Red Riding, and she also plays Myra Hindley in ITV's dramatisation of the Moors murders. And Daniel Mays plays Michael Mishkin in Red Riding in the first one, and he also plays Detective Chief Inspector Peter J in ITV's Des about Dennis Nielsen. So there's loads of research to be done in there, I think. Loads of stuff to unpack about the intertextual baggage of the cast, the thematic resonances, the production practices, but I think that's another podcast episode, isn't it? Right, that was a pretty quick one, I think, but that's it for season 2 of the Murder Media podcast. Teaching starts very soon, and I have a book to write. I don't know yet what the plan is for coming back. I'll do some book stuff, I'll watch the upcoming Netflix series about Ed Gein, and then we'll do some more episodes. I reckon, like I said, I'll get more guests on so that I can do more episodes a lot easier and a lot quicker. If you want to be on the Murder Media podcast and join me for a chat, then just drop me a message. I hope you're all doing well, and again, thank you all for sticking with me while this year has been hectic as all fuck, and I appreciate you all very, very much. Follow and comment on the socials, review the podcast on all the bollocks that you review it on, and I'll speak to you again in the future. Goodbye.